Hello, and welcome everybody to another edition of our Transportation Insights. I'm very excited to be here today with Heiko Schuhmacher from Kuehne-Nagel. Heiko, could you please do a short introduction of yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Also from my side, Heiko Schuhmacher, very quick, 23 years with Kuehne-Nagel, and in the last 1.5 years in charge of the air freight logistics within the European region.
Perfect. That sort of leads us directly into what we're going to talk about today, Heiko, which is air freight. And I mean, after COVID-19 hit us, it has been anything than a normal market. Could you perhaps take us a little bit through what you've seen over the past few months? What's happened in the air freight market?
Sure, I can, Patrik. So what we currently see, by now not a big surprise, is a bit an upside down of the market. So if you want to understand the current situation, you need to start in 2019. We are coming from a market which was mainly driven by a reduced air freight rates, by an ever increasing, so to say, belly capacity, by increasing fleets of passenger aircrafts. So we had a market with increasing capacity, and surely with high pressuring on freighter capacity, which by normal terms always is more expensive for transportation than the belly capacity, since this is already, so to speak, has a high contribution by the passengers itself. So if you now take Corona, it put exactly the case upside down. Overnight, there is a complete stop of passenger traffic, yeah, and therefore the remainder of the capacity which is left all of a sudden is the so-called charter and freighter capacity with no passengers on board. And driven by that, you have two elements, of course. Overnight, a complete supply broke down, and the remainder of a supply definitely not as large to compensate for the passenger aircraft. And of course, then the effect of supply and demand on the rates itself. That means the supply is on a rare capacity, and therefore rates peak to the levels we see until today. Yeah, with all the up and downs between the trades, generally speaking.
Yeah, so maybe could you then elaborate a bit on the, let's say, a couple of big corridors? What have you seen in terms of that trend? What is the change? Anything to share?
So let's explain on two main trades. One, I think, which we all have on our focus is the Asia to Europe trade. Here we started with very high rates overnight into China, mainly triggered also at the beginning by pharma supply. And at the beginning, most people already that's a long time ago. It was Europe sending masks into China when Corona was at its peak in China and Wuhan. And then with a change to the other way around, so the westbound rates did increase, and with the high capacity required in order to get all the PPE material into Europe, actually we had soaring rates on the westbound, while the eastbound rates got very low. Why? By nature, they offset and already paid actually with the transport outbound China. So what you can actually see is that there is a very high fluctuation driven by a few commodities. So if you will, and we are still in this phase right now, we are driven outbound China by two major commodities: the PPE material, we all know, masks and every medical equipment you can think of, including the high tech, which had a boost as well, because we all now in our home offices and we look and seek for better equipment. So that's of course a bit general. Other commodities are still flying. However, with the market level coming up, the traditional commodities we had on this trade, aside of the high tech, were also consumer products. Yeah, let's say consumer industry, like having a fashion, t-shirts, and so on. And all of a sudden, these products are completely pushed out. Why? No demand, and we have a price level in the air freight which the product itself is not able to digest. So very dramatic change if you would compare it to a few months ago. And
yeah, And just for the record, are we? I know it's a sort of like a leading question here, but is it like are we talking about a 20% cost increase in the rate here, or what are we talking about?
No, it's much higher. If you look, Europe outbound, we came from everything between, I would say, rock bottom 70 cents per kilo market up to everything around €1. And it peaked in Corona very fast to 5, 6, 7, sometimes also €8 a kilo. So you talk hundreds of percent. And so is the same effect outbound China now, which also has to do that a lot of the capacity is absorbed by the PPE material, and the PPE material is ordered also by governments, Patrik.
Yeah.
So the human aspect is here much higher to support people and hospitals from a disaster, and therefore the flexibility on the prices towards the airlines to pay, because the end consumer were governments. And the criticality of the business, of course, has nothing to do with a normal business where a company actually needs still to see for how much can they sell their final product and what is actually logistics cost, what amount of logistics cost can the product itself divest.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is going to be interesting, slightly also in the long run, because what does this? This is substantially more expensive transportation, right? And it's when you mention PPE, it sounds to me like also a portion of the volumes being moved can also shift potentially volume as governments or hospitals stacks up. What do you see as the future sort of volumes being moved on air here, considering the belly capacity being gone? What's your future outlook here?
I mean, PPE is at the end, if the urgency is out of the supply chain, a commodity than anything else, right? So assume for the moment that the European countries start to get finally a buffer into this material, then I would say PPE material would have been never a commodity to fly in the first place. So what we will see, and that has now to be seen, how the market regulates, is a few things. First of all, the prices will come down to a degree anymore if the pressure is out of the supply chain or a life-saving equipment, I would call it. And then certain commodities, while the price goes down, will return back to be air freighted. Which commodities and in how far has to be seen. So I think there will be two things. First of all, there will certain industries which might be able to realize a slightly higher price for the product and therefore can still afford the new price level wherever it will be. There will be maybe commodities which have not the ability to return back to that mode of transport. And that would mean that the air freight market itself will be in competition, and always is in wars, of course, with other commodities like the sea freight or a rail transport. And I'm pretty sure that in companies' supply strategies, this will be at least assessed. And experience made during Corona could lead to an overall reduction of demand in air freight.
Interesting. Listen, I know time flies so fast, and I want to make sure I get a couple of more questions in, because as a representative for one of the largest, biggest forwarders, what do you think from a shipper point of view the shippers should be thinking about when evaluating their suppliers these days when it comes to smaller versus larger freight forwarders, and specifically air freight?
I mean, for the last couple of weeks, I would say from a shipper point of view, I think the shipper has an evaluation. Can I still get my cargo transported? How reliable and how frequent? What we shall not forget, even under Corona, air freight always have been a product which was not based too much on price competitiveness, but more on speed and reliability of transport. And I would say in the last couple of weeks in this market, larger transporters by determination have an advantage over the smaller ones. Why? because all or a lion's share of the capacity have to be procured via very expensive charter capacity. That means you buy an aircraft of 100 tons, to make an example, and you have to consolidate these 100 tons on one spot. Why in the past you could have 5 tons here and 10 tons out of another city, simplifying the passenger aircrafts. So if as an LSP like Kuehne-Nagel, you want to still provide the same service than in the past, you need to have the ability to consolidate daily and weekly across the region of Europe, and then uplift it via schedules out of single airports like Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, you name it, but always the ability to fill this 100 tons. And smaller forwarders have a problem to get all this amount of freight at a specific day on a high frequency on one spot. It is simply because of the supply. The passenger aircrafts did suggest a model of decentralization, which died with Corona for the time being.
Yeah. So it sounds almost like there has been a quite favorable market for a larger forwarder in terms of also having opportunities actually with their customers. Interesting. All right, listen, I want to slightly change gears a little bit. I know a lot of our customers has had struggles, shippers in particular has struggles now that, you know, overnight the long-term contracts, their RFQ plans has sort of gone down the drain. Right, and everything, as you mentioned, has moved to a short-term market. What do you think is on the horizon for these large volume players that usually is used to some level of predictability on their cost base and to run an RFQ and settle this, let's say, a budget year? What do you think will happen here in the market? And
I believe, Patrik, eventually we will end up in a normal routine again with RFQs and sustainability of rates in, let's adjust 12-month cycle. For the time being, I see two options. We're coming out of an environment of volatility where probably it went into a top market with maybe weekly updates, or some companies even shopping by the day, I would call it. I think we will have now a time in between where we go more into the idea of sustainability again, and that could be done two ways. Either you keep the existing rate level you have with a supplier XYZ and have certain add-ons, so to speak, which underlie certain rules and regulations in order to balance something out, right? So you take as a base the rate you had pre-corona, because any baseline is fine. It depends more on the adders you have and the adjustments. Or as a company, after a certain amount of time, if market is really a bit more stable and more capacity flying back into the market, it could be that you start an RFQ again, take that as a baseline, and then have again certain rules and regulation around the RFQ. I think giving both the customer as much as us as the LSPs the chance to adjust on the unpredictable things, to speak, as we have just experienced. And I think somewhere in between will be the truth, but clear is customers need to come back to reliable schedules to see that they can do the right thing for their commodity.
All right, Heiko, the truth is that the time I had with you has really come to an end already. Any final comments, any final note from your side in terms of anything the customers are looking at, or solutions that you're offering, or anything you would like to put out there?
I mean, I can only speak for Kuehne-Nagel, and there I think what we're working on high pressure is to build our schedules and frequency to exactly that, what was always the value proposition to a real airfreight customer. Have a reliable schedule and have it to a frequency where the speed actually of this mode of transport plays the major role and gives a reliability to a supply chain of a customer back. And the price, Patrik, and we know that from the past, will balance out again. So this is something which we will go with the market. Customers are professional enough to find market levels, maybe also with the hope of companies like you. So our mission is more to get the product value proposition back, and that is frequency and reliability of service.
Fantastic, appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Heiko. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom. as always, we continue the conversations online in our customer community platform, which you can access at community.xeneta.com, where you can also post any questions and interact with your peers. Again, Heiko, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Patrik. It has been a pleasure.